This is Winchester Academy.
Costs if you purchase them. So tonight's program is called A Light Piercing the Darkness of Human Trafficking. Our presenters are Sisters of Mercy of the Holy Cross from the Merrill, Wisconsin Mother House. And they come to us actually from De Pere. They're a couple of renegade nuns that struck out on their own and made their own household. Sister Celine Gessel started out her career as a music teacher. She has degrees from Marquette University, Alverno College in music, and St. John's in Collegeville is where she got her master's degree. And her PhD, she's a very well-credentialed woman, is from St. Mary's in Baltimore. Also presenting with her is Sister Kathy Lang, and she got her master's degree at St. Mary's in Winona, Minnesota in pastoral ministry. So they are very well qualified for tonight's topic. This is their 7th program on this topic just this month. So they've really been working the state, trying to get the word out and educate people about the subject. So without further ado, Sister Celine.
Good evening, and thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm Sister Celine Gessel, and with me tonight is Sister Kathy Lang. We came to talk to you about a very serious and not at all a fun topic. It's something that we know is happening in all 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin, and very probably, and it's certainly happening here in Waupaca, very probably right in your own backyard. Our mother house, our United States house is in Merrill, Wisconsin. Our big house is in Switzerland, and in 2008, Sister Kathy and I went to Switzerland, and there found out from a sister who came to talk to us from Italy that maybe the sisters were not doing something that was necessary to get out and do. And she said to us, sisters, leave your schools and your hospitals. There are plenty of people we have plenty of doctors and nurses, we have plenty of teachers, but there is no one going out to make the people aware of the horrible crime of human trafficking, which is second to only to drug trafficking and the misuse of guns. So, I came home from Switzerland, and I wasn't quite sure. You know, I said, oh, this woman's from Italy. Yeah, maybe. But what I did immediately, I went to my computer, and I began to do research right away. And you can't imagine my shock when I discovered article after article after article on human trafficking. And it was such a large topic that I didn't know where to begin. And you know, I'm an old lady, I can't think that fast. So I thought I better take like a smaller piece of the pie. So what I did from 2008 until 2018 now, I'm still doing it, I continue weekly to do research on human sex trafficking and primarily among our children. Sister Kathy offered a tremendous support and encouragement in the efforts that I've been making since then. She only retired from real work last year. And so, you know, she said, Jesus sent people out 2 and 2. So she said, I think that maybe I better help you. I was grateful. I didn't know whether she thought that she couldn't trust me out alone or what, but I think that's not it. So then, in 2012, I was appointed the United States liaison to our international community to make the entire community of over 3,000 sisters throughout the world in 12 countries, to make them aware of what this was really about. And so, so Kathy and I are here doing this. Then in 2017, I went back to Switzerland because we were having a symposium on human sex trafficking at the Mother House. It was a 5-day meeting, and there was one person from each of the 12 countries that we minister in. One person who was to come to talk to us to tell us, what does human sex trafficking look like in your county? So here we are tonight to talk to you about a reality that, as many have told us, people are very stunned. And you know, I think, I'm not real sure, I think this is number either 97 or 98th talk that I've given in the last few years. And people still come to us to say that they don't think it's happening in their own town, in their own rural area. And we want to tell, whoops. Oh. We want to tell you that you better turn it off so that I can just give mine to you. We want to tell you that this is very probably happening among family members, friends, neighbors, right here in Wapaka County. So, we have a problem. There are 4 groups of people. Oh, I'm sorry. Kathy has to tell you what human sex trafficking is first. Okay.
Well, we thought before we give you a lot of facts and figures and statistics, we better define what we're talking about. So we want to give you a definition as we see it of what we believe to be this modern form of slavery. It is the buying and selling of human beings, men, women, boys, and girls, as though they were store-bought merchandise. They are lured, tricked, coerced, threatened, drugged, deceived, and sometimes abducted into the human trafficking industry, where they are often treated like animals. In fact, the traffickers often talk about having a stable of 5 to 7 victims. And so the traffickers befriend their victims and groom them sometimes for several months, maybe even up to 2 years, to get their confidence. And then during that time, the victims they become addicted to alcohol and drugs, so that the traffickers have total control and domination over them. Then they force the victim to have sex with a buyer who is often cruel. The trafficker can be paid an average of $150 an hour, more or less depending on the age of the victim and the services required. Younger people usually cost more, and if the victim is a virgin, the trafficker can demand up to $2,000.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a big problem. There are 4 groups of people who are engaged in this terrible ministry. Terrible, no, crime, the left side.
I said it on the surface.
Oh, on the surface? One more.
There we go.
Okay. So we have a problem. There are 4 groups of people who are engaged in this terrible crime. They're the buyer, the pimp. The buyer is sometimes called a John. We don't like that name because I bet somebody in here is named John, and we don't want to insult the people who have that name. Call them what they are. The trafficker or the pimp, the victim, the survivor. Survivors don't like to be called victims. I don't know, but it includes both girls and boys who are bought and sold for profit. And we also just found out that there are facilitators, and they are the men and the women who work with the trafficker in order to transport victims or arrange for the sale of a victim with a buyer. The buyer of sex fuels the market with his money. Buyers are often men with a lot of means. Of course, if they're going to spend $2,000 for 1 hour, they need to have money. Many times they're between the ages of 18 and 84. They can, yes, 84. They can be fathers of reputable families, having a good wife. They could be CEOs or doctors or clergy or teachers, policemen, people that are respected in their own communities. And maybe people that we know, but the face of a buyer, you can't tell by looking at them. So they often spend a lot of time on the internet, looking at pornography and getting addicted, and then they store all these things in their mind, and then this is no longer enough just to look at a picture. They have to go out and have the real thing. And you know what addiction does. You know what addiction to drugs, addiction to alcohol, addiction to sex. Same kind of things. Endorphins run around in your brain, and that person has no control. Then we have the pimps, the traffickers. They're people who make sure that the buyer is going to have a victim. Most of them are men, but we're finding out that also there are some women who are out working in conjunction with the trafficker. Only 5% of these victims are kidnapped. The rest are, as Kathy said, coerced or drugged or whatever. Generally, there are 2 kinds of pimps. There's the Romeo pimp, who wines and dines the victim and acting as an older boyfriend very often, buying expensive gifts and lots of clothes and that type of thing. And then there's the gorilla pimp, who makes more cruel demands on victims earlier and takes a shorter time to groom them. These people, these pimps, these traffickers are about 40 to 50 years old, but they often they catch young girls and young boys and make them think that they're their own age and want to be their boyfriend. And they control their victims by making threats to harm their family or any members in their home. And they also tend to withhold basic needs such as sleep and food and water and resources. You know, most of our kids nowadays have iPhones, and they will take the phone away and say, all right, You can't have it back until you learn to obey the trafficker.
The third group, or the victims, are the ones who are targeted for sex trafficking. Victims can be as young as 7 years old, but we're finding out that they can even be younger. Like we even heard of a 2-year-old who was abused. They have no voice, and so it's just a scary thing. The average age is 10 to 14 years, however, when traffickers can break down and dominate young minds for total control. Victims can come from all walks of life. We have people say, well, do you notice that there's any difference between race or anything like that? And we say, no, they're from all over, all walks of life. Sometimes from foster care, sometimes from abandonment, sometimes runaways. They can come from wealthy or poor families. There's no delineation there either. Sometimes it's just a young person who is disgruntled with her parents, and she gets on the internet, looks for acceptance and love from somebody usually older than she is, an older boyfriend. And so this becomes a very vulnerable person. Vulnerability is very, very, I don't know what you would say. It's very important in terms of knowing whether the trafficker knowing whether somebody is vulnerable or not. And they can pick out a vulnerable person so easily. We're told that the schools are finally, through their safe environment programs, are finally teaching some of the middle school students how to be confident and how to walk tall with their shoulders back and their eyes looking forward, so that if somebody would come up to a young girl, let's say in a mall, and say to her, my, but did anybody ever tell you you have the most beautiful eyes? If she can look straight ahead to this person and say thank you and keep walking on, she's probably not going to be a targeted person. But if instead she looks down at the ground like this and just kind of mumbles a little bit, they can spot that that's a vulnerable person so easily. Other victims may be older women whom the general population thinks of as prostitutes. These women have most likely been trafficked themselves at an early age, and they don't know any other kind of life. We've not talked to any women who say, oh, I'm so happy to go out and sell my body. Perhaps some of these women have been married at an early age. They have dependent children now. Their husbands have left them or divorced them, and the woman herself has no work skills, so she has to provide a roof over her children's heads and food and clothing. So she gets kind of hooked and resorts to this kind of life in order to provide for her children. And this is the fourth group that we were talking about, the facilitator. These can be either men or women, and they work for the trafficker. Sometimes they don't even know who their trafficker is, but their main role, their main job, is to transport victims from place to place, across the state, even across state lines. Or they arrange the sale of a victim to the buyer.
So let's talk about trafficking in our own state of Wisconsin. It exists throughout Wisconsin. Average age, we talked about that already. 80% of human trafficking in Wisconsin is sex trafficking. Only 20% is labor trafficking. And sex trafficking, we know now from statistics that it's a $150 billion a year industry. You see there, worldwide, any age, gender, race, religion, socioeconomic background. And the enormous profit just goes to the traffickers for the repeated sale of a victim. It occurs in both urban and rural areas. You know, sometimes we get the feedback from people that we talk to. Yeah, that's in big cities. Yeah, that's in India or China. Yeah, that's in Chicago, but certainly not in Wapaka. And we want you to know that no matter how urban or how rural the area is, that main route through Wisconsin is Milwaukee, Fox Cities and Green Bay, Wausau, Minneapolis. But there are other routes through the city, through the state, and we'll tell you about that in a bit. Top industries are PIP-controlled prostitution, commercial front brothels, escort services, pornography, and stripping. And where does the victim get recruited? On the internet primarily. And I have to say that that is probably the most dangerous place. And how many of your children or grandchildren or people you know, children, have their own computers? A few. Well, I bet you might find out that most of them do. And how many of them have cell phones? Yeah, they all do. Yes, and those are places, that is probably the worst place that victims are recruited. On social media also. Around schools, and actually police departments have been making sure that around schools, they usually patrol that pretty well. At malls, how many of you have been to the Mall of America? Whoa, lots of hands. Okay, that Mall of America is probably the worst mall for human trafficking that we can find. Does Wapaka have a mall of any kind? Sort of. Okay, sort of. Strip malls, yes. Well, Green Bay does. Green Bay has, what's the name of it? Bay Park. And we have discovered that pimps are there day and night looking for victims in little Green Bay. So, and then on the street, in parks. Now there's one place that, this one I took, I took a commercial one. But there's one place that is not recognized with this slide, and that's at libraries. You know, so often moms are at their wits' end, and the kids, they have a couple days off of school, and moms say, you know, why don't you go to the library and do some reading, or go down and get a book or whatever. And most likely, what the child will do is get on the computer, because there are plenty of computers right up here in the library, and they'll get on the computer, and who's going to know what they're looking at? So computers are, libraries are a terrible place. Oh yes, they are, sorry. That top one is just about a girl in the Fox Cities. Pope Francis is really, stepping right behind us and saying, it is not possible to remain indifferent before the knowledge that human beings are bought and sold like goods. And we told you that tonight. So, now that you know, you can't be indifferent anymore. Average number of times a victim is sold in a day is 10 to 15 times. Now, I was down in Fond du Lac at a convention, and there was a survivor who got up and said she had been sold sometimes 35 times a day. Can you imagine how that body must suffer? The life expectancy after entry into this kind of crime is 7 years. simply because the body can't take all of that abuse, and also because pimps control their victims by alcohol and drugs. So there is a national human trafficking hotline. The national people like you to use it, but I have to tell you that I think that there's a better way. You have this little card that you picked up with your handouts. It's a little card right on the front. And on the back, it said call it the hotline, or I put, and I made thousands of these and hand them out. I put dial 911. That goes right in here in Waupaca. So you dial 911, you get somebody, you don't have to tell them who you are. It might be a good idea if you do to help, in case they have more questions. But I can tell you that your police department will have somebody sent there close to in 5 minutes, because they're very concerned. And so you have to say what you saw, where you saw it, and why you think it looks suspicious. Now, maybe it's a dad who's just had it with his kid, and he's roughing the kid up as they're walking down the street. Call anyway, because police are glad, even if it's not a human trafficking thing, they're still glad to get that call. Let's see. I think, okay.
Nationwide, all 50 states have human trafficking cases. According to an organization called Exploit No More, they give 2017 statistics about the worst states in our country, the 5 worst. The 5th, Ohio, the 4th, Minnesota, the 3rd, Florida, the 2nd worst, Texas, and the worst, California.
And one of our survivors who's working with us said, will you look at that? Every state is bordered somehow by water. And she said she's convinced that waterways have something to do, make a big difference. Sorry.
That's right. This crime is so insidious that it is very difficult to report accurate statistics for very long. Efforts by states to curb trafficking are helping to change those statistics, and also law enforcement efforts, the number of stings that take place, are also helping to change those statistics. At one time, it was reported that Wisconsin was the 5th worst state. But now, according to the latest statistics from another group called Shared Hope International, we are 21st in ranking. But doesn't mean that our trafficking is decreasing. It just means that efforts are better able to crack down on the trafficking that's going on. We just can't know all the facts because they are changing so rapidly. You got it right there.
You might wonder why we are so prone to this crime. There are a number of reasons. First reason is there's an active pimp school somewhere in Milwaukee. And we're always asked, well, why don't the cops go in and close them off? Well, it's not a building. And pimps are very intelligent men and women. And they're so elusive. Like, there's somebody watching out. And if they see a cop coming, bing, they close up and they're gone. So, I don't know, somewhere, Milwaukee is the place because there's one paper coming out of Milwaukee called The Guardian, and it says that this pimp school is the Harvard School of Pimps, where they come from every other state to learn the techniques of pimping.
pimps have corridors for quick getaways all over Wisconsin. And if you want to go to the next one, there. Oops, one back. That's okay. That's all right. If you take a look at our state, there you can pretty much see not all of our highways, but most of the major ones. We have north-south routes such as highways 90 and 94, 53, 39 and 51, 41, 43, and 141, as some of them. And then the east-west routes, highways 2, 8, 64, 29, 10, and 18.
So, 10 is coming right to Wapaka. Okay. Our state is rural, and many people are unaware of the crime that's happening right in our own neighborhoods, because I think that us Wisconsin folks, especially us farmers, and I came off of a farm, you know, we're more trusting than our relatives and friends like in Chicago or New York City or these other bigger places. And I think we don't hear about it as much, and we don't run into it, and it doesn't impact us. But of course, you all heard about Barron, Wisconsin during the past couple of weeks. And they didn't know about it either. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we were up in Rice Lake talking one day and down in New Richmond the next day. And Barron is right in between. And I know those people over in that part of Wisconsin just would shake their heads and say, I can't believe it. Like the pastor that I worked with in Green Bay said, Celine, I know you don't lie, but I just cannot wrap my mind around what you're saying. So, it does happen. Truck stops are a huge area for human trafficking, where pimps can bring in 5 or 6 of their victims, and then they contract truckers that they know come back and forth very often, and they say, hey, ooh, we got some cute little girls, very innocent. We got black, we've got white, we've got Asian, we have whatever. What do you want tonight? Hey, back up your truck as far away from the buildings of the truck stop as you can, and we'll make sure that you have somebody that'll really, you'll like being with her. And then the truckers will come in, they'll back up, and then the pimp comes in, lets all the girls out, and they go from truck to truck to truck to truck, and just knock on the door. And I just talked to a trucker who had been trucking for 28 years, and he said, yeah, that's what happens in a lot of the truck stops. And they knock on the door and they say, hey, mister, would you like to have sex tonight, or hey, would you like to have some fun? And they are groomed to say that. That's not the thing on their minds. They're scared to death. But they're groomed to say that. And the pimp says, don't come back to my car, and he's usually at the very end of the line. Don't come back until you have at least $800 to $1,000 in your pocket. And if the girl doesn't comply, she may be beaten, deprived of food, put in solitary confinement in a cage or in a box until she's ready to obey. And then, of course, those victims must hand over all the money to the pimp, who has been known to lie, saying that he'll keep the money for the time when they get married. There's an organization called Truckers Against Trafficking, whose main office is in Colorado. But they have truckers throughout the United States who are more alert as to what is going on and making efforts to police their own. We talk We could talk more about this because this is a big, big place.
We are a tourist state. Yeah, still on that one, that's okay.
Sorry.
And it's been known, I guess, that people, when they go on vacation, when they go away from home, so many times they will do things that they would never think of doing at home. So you can think, I'm sure, of all kinds of tourist places in Wisconsin. We've got Wisconsin Dells, we've got Minocqua, we've got Door County, we've got lakes all over the place, and it just is human nature, I guess, that people, when they get away from home, they'll do different things that they wouldn't think of doing at home.
Then we also have large gatherings, sporting events, concerts, and venues where people get together. And trafficking goes on big time at the home Packer games. In fact, I was put to the task a couple years ago before I think the police knew terribly much what was going on. And one of my friends, who's a policeman, was called in, and he was told by his boss, "Don't have anything to do with that damn nun, she's a liar." And nothing is happening here in our county. Well, I think he learned about 6 months later that all kinds of things were happening. Oh, this is not the fault of the Packers. Yes. Yes. But people come to games with plenty of money, and sometimes people come to games and don't even go to the game. And then there are big, what do they call them on the fourth level of?
Oh, the suites.
The suites.
The
The boxes.
Seats.
And that's where pimps can bring their victims up to. So, well, we better leave it at that because our time is running away.
Law enforcement doesn't have an overabundance of staff on the police force to keep up with human trafficking activities. We know that every one of our 72 counties is involved and has big problems. And it is primarily because of lack of personnel and money to pay salaries of the staff that they need. A couple of years ago, law enforcement efforts in Chicago and Milwaukee tightened up their watches, and so the traffickers moved their operations further north, and of course that's Green Bay. And so we talked to a police officer from Green Bay who said that Green Bay is now a hub of high intense human trafficking activity. And some of the worst dangers include the internet and cell phones that give anyone of any age access to information, either to help eradicate the crime or to fuel it into more lucrative activities. We have found that there are at least 20 different ways to purchase sex on the internet through apps on phones. And these three that we mentioned here, KIK, Kik, this one comes from Canada, has to do with texting, where I think you can remain anonymous. Music.ally, Musically, and Whisper. All you have to do is ask your children or your grandchildren if they've heard of these. I'm sure they have. We don't know what they are. There's probably a lot more than just those three. Social media, Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram, and then there are the websites, Backpage and Craigslist, entertainer types of magazines. When we go shopping, we check out the magazines at the checkout, and we always would look for Cosmopolitan. That's always one that has had suggestive pictures on the front. And when we see that one, we turn it over to the back side, but a lot of times it's no better on the back side, the back cover. So we've even talked to a couple of different people in the stores to say, can't you do something about making sure that magazine doesn't come in here? And they say, well, it's in with the whole batch, we can't do anything about it, but we try. And we haven't noticed it so much lately. We haven't noticed that one. Unlicensed commercial front massage parlors are dangerous, can be dangerous. Hotels, private homes, even a 15-minute encounter in a car. That we were told that those are becoming more common.
You know, this is a business, and with every business, there's a supply and a demand. The demand is high, and so we need to help. At first, the Catholic sisters, especially in the state of Wisconsin, were all out there saying, we got to take care of the victims, we got to take care of these little kids. And we were probably putting the horse before the cart, because now, after a couple of years, we finally got some smarts, and we're going after the buyers. And in some towns, there are groups who will have a poster, what do they call it? The big billboards. A billboard out saying, buyers of sex are not welcome in this town. So we are doing something about stopping that.
We want to talk a little bit about pornography, because this is becoming rampant all over. It's a tremendous danger because it causes addictions in the brains of viewers. Online pornography has reached epidemic proportions, as the following statistics show. 1 in 5 men, or 20% of adult men, admit to watching porn at work. At work. About 13% of women do the same.
So CEOs take note.
We hear that 2 o'clock in the afternoon seems to be the hour of the day when people start looking toward pornography. 67% of men agree that porn is okay, and 49% of women. 25% of men visit porn every month. 28% of viewers are women. The revenue from pornography is more than all professional basketball, football, and baseball franchises combined. Child pornography generates about $3 billion annually. Every second, porn makes over $5,000, and every second, nearly 30,000 internet users are viewing pornography. There are over 116,000 searches for child pornography every day.
And there is where some of your 2 and 3 and 4-year-olds are being taken advantage of to use in pornography, or to use with experimentation. Okay.
Sunday, believe it or not, is the most popular day to watch pornography. And a Harvard study shows that porn subscriptions are more numerous in conservative states. 50% of Christian men say that they are addicted to porn. The average age of a person having their first pornography exposure is 11 years old. The average age.
Now, these facts are gathered from a website which you have on your front page, and it has a red line through it, because we wanted you to make sure that you can access the internet. It's ipsciences.edu/pornography. Here are the words of a pimp. With the young girls, you promise them heaven, and they'll follow you to hell. Now, we have a few, we have a couple stories, and we have to be out of here by 8, so I want to tell you about the story about, the story about the truck stop in Wittenberg, which is on Highway 29. It's halfway between Green Bay and Wausau. And we discovered, we stop there often because when we have to go to Merrill to meetings, then we sometimes stop and eat our meal. And our server was obviously person trafficked because and tattoos on the back of her neck were initials. And in my research, I discovered that meant a pimp is telling other pimps, keep your hands off, she belongs to me. And then also when she came back and brought us our food, I noticed right here on her wrist was an oval shape with chains, and in the middle of it, it said Daddy. Now this girl was probably about 16. Why would she be putting Daddy, her daddy, on her wrist? I don't think so. But I also know that pimps demand that their victims call them Daddy. And so when she took our plates away and brought our bill, I made sure I had some of these because you may be her only voice. And that's why I pass these out by the thousands. We had hoped, I left 2 of them there and then put the tip on top of them. And then we stopped in the restroom, and this was a strange thing. We had stopped in that restroom before. I never saw this shelf about this high above where you wash your hands, about that high, and there was a whole shelf. So I took a bunch of these, and about every 15 inches, I put one all the way across. And then I stepped back and I said, Dear God, please do not let the cleaning woman take them away and throw them in the bathroom. So that was one. Would you like to talk a little bit about things?
Well, just in general, I think to be aware of your surroundings when you're out shopping, especially. We've heard stories of women or young girls who have gone into restrooms at the mall or in restaurants, and somebody is in there. Somebody is in the women's restroom, and if the husband hadn't been waiting for his wife one time, and a mother waiting for her child or daughter to come out of the restroom, they were drugged inside the restroom, and somebody brought them out hanging, on their arm, and
one was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
The wife was. The wife. Yeah.
The husband said, "What did you do to my wife?" And the mother said, "Well, that's my daughter." This woman was making believe that this was her daughter and that she was sick and she was asking for help. So you just can't be too careful. And shopping. There have been reports of people shopping at night, coming out of a Target store, for example, and it's dark, and they're coming out with their children. There are people watching out in the parking lot who they can just grab. Even during the daytime, somebody can come up to you in a store. There was an example of a man, a stranger, came up to a woman about Halloween time and asked her if she celebrated Halloween. And she didn't know this man from Adam. She had her little child in the seat of the grocery cart, but she had put her child down on the floor next to her. And this man is asking, what about Halloween? And so she said, well, yes, we celebrate. But then he went on to a rant and rave about how evil it was, and it was all about the devil. And all the while he had his eye on this woman at the end of the aisle, and they were looking down at this child. And so to distract, she just said, thank you, and started walking away. And she got out of the store with her child intact. And she didn't know what happened to those 2 people, but it just goes to show that you've got to be totally aware of your surroundings, because you just don't know where somebody could be.
Okay. I'd like to tell you just one more story of what we know about human trafficking. And that is, how many people are here are nurses or doctors or work at hospitals. Okay, listen to this and pass this on, please. It was a young doctor. He had just gotten his degree, and it was his first night in the emergency. And an older man brought in a young girl, and he said, please help my daughter. She fell down the steps, and I think she's got some broken bones, and he said, I'm just really concerned. So he laid her down on one of the gurneys there. And then the nurse said, well, sir, would you please step out? And he said, no, my daughter is so traumatized that she can't even talk. So I have to talk for her and let you know what to look for. And the doctor was looking at the nurse and saying, what's going on with you? And the nurse said, no, she said, I'll call security and have you removed if you don't leave. So he left. Well, they took that daughter up to the X-ray room. And the doctor said, he said, honey, there's something in your side. What in the world is that? And she didn't want to tell him at first, but finally he said, I really need to know what that is so that I can really help you get well. So she said, well, that's a chip. And he said, a chip? And she said, yeah, when families have dogs or cats and they sometimes run away, but they put chips in them so they know where they are at every moment of the day or night. So he said, honey, I'm going to remove that. So he did, and the next day he took it down to the veterinarian. My mind is going. And he said, you know what this is? And he said, sure, that's a chip. People put that in the animals so that they can keep track of them. So there you are. A lot of nurses have told me, as I talk to the hospital staffs, that they think they have seen a lot of human sex trafficking, but they didn't know what it was. So I think we want to stop here and show you a DVD of, you know how to, okay, go ahead. We want to show you a DVD of a young woman who is a survivor and a very well survivor. And I've had her come to talk, but it costs over $3,000, and I didn't think that Waupaca could afford that. So we're bringing her, and then also she is also on this DVD for $5. She's the same person and tells a longer story. Are there any, while we're waiting for Sister to get that ready, is there anybody who has a question? Yes?
You know what always bothers me is that they call them gentlemen's club, and I know that, it's strippers, and so, and I know about free speech and all this, but these are the places where all these buyers are coming, right? And we know that we've got them all over the place, and it's disgusting.
Gentlemen's clubs, absolutely. And you see these big billboards that talk about gentlemen's clubs and about, where you can buy fun toys. Yes, that's
to me, a community could say, we don't tolerate this anymore. I mean, don't you think
you can
could say that?
Absolutely, you can.
Got enough support?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Does your order offer recovery for the survivors?
We do not offer recovery, but I'm acquainted with people. We have a safe home in Brown County called the Rose Home, and we've been in contact with those people. The survivor from Door County will be introducing not only a safe house, but a place where these people can get educated. But, you know, I would help a girl work through and get ready to take a GED. You know, that's really one of the main reasons why Kathy and I are not sitting in a little convent in Merrill. Not because we need to be out where these things are happening, and we need to, yes.
Are you familiar with Deacon Trabelski in Milwaukee?
I am not.
Okay, well, he's a Catholic deacon.
Deacon.
He works the streets on the north side of Milwaukee, and we had a presentation made by him similar to what you're doing. He's
Fabulous.
done that. One of the things that stuck with me that he remarked that he befriended a whole lot of these victims on the street,
Right.
but they're not at liberty in their own mind to go with him, and he's got a facility to take them to it that where
Yes.
they can be housed and protected, fed, but they're hesitant to leave the street and leave their pimp.
That's very true. And nobody, I don't care, sister, priest, deacon, nobody should try to take those victims away and make them safe. What you need to do is call the police departments, because they are now trained, and that will be important.
CDs for sale.
Yeah, it is for sale, and she will tell you very much of the story. You can turn it
Okay,
off.
now we have a question.
I'm just curious why that story you told about your restaurant experience, why you didn't call police?
You know what? Yes, thank you. My fault. Sorry. I should have gone right out and called the police. That was the first time that I had been so close, and we thought the pimp was sitting right in the restaurant watching her, and I was scared. And so we left. And if it had been in Green Bay, I would have been happy to call 911 real quick, because I know the policeman there. And we got out, and I am forever sorry about that. But thanks for bringing it up, because that was
That is really the thing you should.
that's the thing you should do, absolutely. Okay,
You talked about a lot of the children, the children are groomed for some time. It sounds like, at least in the early stages, they must still be with their families.
oh, absolutely,
And-
they are.
and that, somehow or another, the family is missing, that something's going on. I mean, not the family's fault, but,
Yeah.
you know.
And, anybody who buys this DVD, Teresa Flores will talk about that. She was with her family for a long time.
And parents never did find out what was going on.
Well, and they didn't believe, she was brought home one night, and they just said, oh, she's been out whoring, doggone it. And they didn't even take her to the hospital, to emergency, to see if she was, and she was traumatic about it. She was in shock. Yes.
Any more questions? Raise your hand.
I have a comment. When today I encountered a person who shared with me that she and her husband are involved with the Agape Center here on Main Street. It's a center for people who have unwanted pregnancies. And one of the second person that came in, it's been open not even a year now, that came in actually told the person that was counseling that she had been sex trafficked. Now this is right here on Main Street. And there have been 2 or 3 other young women who have had that same story. So just an awareness that we cannot deny that this exists in our community, because it is here. And the person who was a counselor didn't know anything about sex trafficking and has since done all kinds of research on it, realizing that it is pervasive. So,
Thank you. There's somebody up here who wants.
What might we expect a police officer to do when he gets there? What might we expect a police officer to do when we call him to the mall?
They will go in and they have been trained. I don't know of any police departments who haven't at least one or two trained people. And they will go right in and they will find the trafficker and you know, this is why you have stings, because they get calls and they don't go in alone, but they'll take a group in with them and take care of the matter. We might not find out, you know, what happened in the long run, but they are trained now, so we can just, we have to put it into their hands.
The stereotype I have of a pimp is someone who's very flashy, wears a lot of bling and fancy, expensive clothes, and we don't see people like that on our streets. How do you identify someone who's trying to be a little more discreet under the radar and blend in so he can really do his evil business?
You know, until a couple of years ago, that's what pimps did. They ran around in Cadillacs because they had all this money, and they were all, you know, gussied up. And they discovered that that was not good for their business. And so now they have toned it down. They come around maybe in small cars and rusty cars or whatever. And they're not, now, Teresa Flores on my tape is going to tell you that that's what really, you know, caught her eye. This guy who was wearing jewelry and smelled good and whatever.
He wasn't the usual sports guy, you know. Jock, yeah.
So, yeah, you don't find that anymore because the pimps have gotten smarter. Thank you, though, for bringing that up.
Doesn't this say we've got a worse problem in our society than what we're recognizing?
Yes, very, very much so. And I have to tell you, in all of my research, I think what is happening, that there's a greater problem than the actual sex trafficking, and that is the
broken homes.
Broken homes. Our society
Families.
is so broken, and relationships are so bad. And so, you know, I thank you because there are a couple things that I'd like to say to you about what we can do. First of all, we really need to pray, because without God, we can't do anything about this kind of work. And I'm not saying that because I happen to have an SR in front of my name. I think, you know, we need God's help. Education is a great place to start, and that's why thank you for letting us come tonight, and thank you for having other people who have come to talk about this crime. Then look through your handouts. Now these handouts, we have the problem, and that's exactly right off of my PowerPoint. Then the red flags, and those are important. I know that we weren't going to get young families, young moms and dads here, but I'm sure we've got some grandmas and grandpas. And so we put in the human trafficking of children in the United States a fact sheet for schools, and that's a 2-pager. And so there's plenty to read on that. The dangers, and then the second last one, how can we end human trafficking? And it has questions for parents and grandparents, teenagers, young men, young women, and community members. So I would ask you to look through those. And then the last one, there are myths, things that are being said that aren't true. So all of these things, I just hope that you take the time and to read through them.
Do we have any more questions?
We have one over here.
It's more a comment than a question. The women of the ELCA over at Trinity Lutheran Church a couple of years ago had a presentation on sex trafficking at one of our conferences, and we purchased 2 of the DVDs. And remember what you said at the very beginning, vulnerability is what is really expressed on this DVD. It's not a broken home. The girl, the teenager who gets involved in sex trafficking has a loving family, loving friends. She meets someone at a party who happens to be just a little bit older, but she was vulnerable. And it moves on from there, and it's only because she tells a friend at the high school who steps in, bravely steps in and says, wait a minute, I'm not going to help you leave town, that she is rescued before she gets into the situation. It's a great DVD. It's 25 minutes long, 20 minutes long, something like that. But it shows you the girl next door, because she is the girl next door. She's any one of our Waupaca High School students.
Good. Thank you so much.
We have another question.
Actually, it kind of generated between what you presented and then what you commented about at the Agape program, that there were, I'm curious, the time frame when this was. Do we think that the local truck stop was a site? Did she end up getting into a group that could help her? Do you know?
To the best of my knowledge, and it was a brief conversation that I had, was that the person is working with people through human services, and the young woman is getting counseling. But as I think Sister shared at dinner, is that anyone who's been a victim of human trafficking needs a lot of healing. And that is a process that may take many years to do this. The young woman is having a child, so there will be a child, but you know, which complicates any situation, and the healing process. You know, so the person that is getting support, but that's one person, and I am also aware through other contacts that I have that you know there is a lot of prostitution happening, a lot of drug trafficking right here in the city of Waupaca. So and in the outlying areas. You know, whether it's a home or a small old hotel or motel or someplace, there are places this is happening.
Motel 6 is a bad motel. It's cheap, but trafficking is going on there constantly. And yes, and you know, we have a safe home in Brown County, but it's a 12 to 15 month rehabilitation. That doesn't make any sense to me, because people who are traumatized, it takes 2 to 3 years to even help them stand on their own feet and realize who they really are, and that they have a loving God who loves them unconditionally. And that takes a long time. If you think of your own lives, you know, when you have trauma, that takes a long time to get over. And if you've been traumatized as a young child and not able to even help yourself. So, yes.
I have a question. Do you ever come across maybe a little older women, maybe 18, 20, 22, that are desperate for whatever reason and have no financial resources and turn to prostitution? Do they always work through a pimp or a trafficker, or do some just strike out on their own and try and make a living?
They don't always work through a pimp. We were in the Upper Peninsula making a retreat at one of our friends' places, and a woman came in, and she paid for 5 nights, I think, with a wad of 200 bills, and gave that, and was there. And she didn't seem to have a pimp. She was just there. I don't know who dropped her off, but I know that my friend who ran that place called the police department. And I saw the police come up. So I went and sat out on my veranda. Because I wanted to say, policeman, if you are mean, if you are terrible to this woman, I'm going to get up and walk right over to you, and I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to like or hear. But she seemed to be all alone. But when they came up, they were very kind to her, and very considerate, and very gentle. And they told her, you know, you have to come with us now, and you want to smoke a cigarette, get sit down and smoke it, and we'll just wait for you. But there didn't seem to be a pimp around, so.
Sometimes husbands will send their wives out. It's true prostitution. If the husband doesn't have a job, sends his wife out to work.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I know there's more discussion to be had, and hopefully you can have that among yourselves and friends and let other people know the reality. I know I have 2 young granddaughters, and try to teach, you know, self-awareness and to know surroundings and to be aware. You know, one is 16; she totally needs to know all of this, and a 9-year-old who also needs to know all of it. But it's a hard topic to bring up. I don't know what programs are being offered in the school that might help children be aware, so I can't answer that. But anyway, we need to give a warm thank you to Sister Jackie.